Thank you for being willing to take a few minutes to talk to us here at Enedco. I'd love to start with an introduction, who you are, kind of what's your connection with education, and then what is it that you are passionate about bringing to teachers and to the world of education?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost is, I was raised by a family of strong African American women. So I oftentimes tell people that I just really feel like now is my time to do my part, right? And carry the torch in my family. So my connection is really just, I feel like I was just placed in this work for a reason. And so my time is now, by my ancestors, by my family. And my connection is, being one of the only students oftentimes placed going to primarily white institutions and being one of the only students of color. I knew that my journey oftentimes felt different in academia, and I wanted to make a change. I knew that something was missing for me. Experiential learning activities were missing for me. Voices as my time as a student were missing for me. Voices from students of color, voices of students who carried multiple identities were missing for me as my time as a student. And I knew I wanted to be a part of making change and making some waves in that area. And so as I got into my master's program, I got to interface with students and also professors who shared my passion. And I just really got to be I was gifted the opportunity to hear folks' stories and really validated my experience that just something different needs to happen.
I know that many of us in the last few years have just felt a real weight on our hearts to be doing more than what we have been doing, and to make sure that every student in our classroom feels loved and represented and welcomed and honored. What words would you share with that person?
Absolutely. One is just validating that. I think that's a familiar place that no matter what you look like, what kind of baseball suit you wear, what color your skin is, I think that's a familiar place that we've all journeyed before. So I just want to validate that experience. Two is that there's really no one right answer. What I have found to be beneficial in my own journey, and what I oftentimes share, is that we are just naturally inclined to do life with people who share our same thoughts and feelings, and who look like us, and who come from similar backgrounds. And so I just encourage people to get out there and just connect with people who come from all walks of life, and really to start with one. And oftentimes, I remember when I first heard that, it was at a social justice retreat, and I was sitting next to someone who, for whatever reason, her name is Dora. She really took me under her wing and engaged conversation with me, and we share some similar identities, but for the most part, we share a lot of different racial and orientation identities. And she just started to engage conversation with me. And I remember just walking away from those conversations just changed by my perspective had changed. My ability to understand her perspective started to shift, and I was really just gifted with her time and energy that she invested in me, and I just found myself wanting to be more and more in her presence. And so what she shared with me is just, she asked me, who do I do life with? Like, where do I spend what do I spend the majority of my time? And at that time in my life, it was football players. I grew up in a football background. I was always in a locker room. And at that time in my life, I remembered, hey, I'm doing okay in spending time with people who don't look like me, because every year there were 99 guys in a locker room who came from all walks of life. But what she helped me to understand is, although that was true, that we came from all parts of the world, we all had similar ideologies, a similar way of understanding the world, because we bonded through the sport of football. That my world was very central to the game of football, and I didn't have a broad understanding of people who just did life differently than me. And so she just challenged me. She said, you don't have to go like travel to find people who do life differently. Just think about the context to which you live and just find one person. Even, we were working in the Center of Human Enrichment together. She said, just go across the hallway, and ask Julie, a question that you would normally ask one of your teammates and see what you find out. And I just remember just taking up her advice and finding myself being changed.
I love that. I think if I were to try to process that in my own words, I might say, don't be afraid to be curious and to just take the time to have human conversations with people.
Yes.
Do you think people get offended by other people being nosy about them? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I certainly think in the context of everything that's happened in, the past couple of decades, but certainly as the focus on the divisions has increased over the past couple of years, absolutely.
Have you found any tools or strategies that help? Because, we want to both be curious and respectful. Have you found tools or strategies that have worked for you that help to bridge that gap?
I have. I'm a big fan of transparency, right? Transparency and as my grandmother used to always tell me is not only leaving the world better than you found it, but leaving relationships better than you found them. Mm-hmm. So as I seek to understand people better and differently, I share that. I'm open with folks. So, I would say, hey, Liz, I'm coming to you to try to develop a more intimate relationship with you and try to get to know you differently and better. But if I may, can I share with you a little bit why? And I would just say, I've never interfaced with, someone who I assume has different identities than I do. Is that something that you're willing to explore with me? And then that gives you permission to opt in or opt out.
I love that. What a great way.
And I think too, to add to that, and one thing that I oftentimes share that's oftentimes adds to the complexity of DEI work is learning oftentimes comes at the expense of those who have been harmed or pained, right? Where
you mentioned that. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, where so and I trust that this ignited my passion to do this work, as I oftentimes found myself in the back of the classroom being asked, I think sometimes even masked under the word invited, to share of my experience as a person of color. But what I found is when I didn't necessarily gain anything. Like, I knew about my experiences of pain. So a lot of folks took away from my experience, but I left away just feeling like my wound had been ripped open and no repair had been done. But other people were like, whoa, that, thanks for sharing. And, we're going to learn and we're going to take away from that. But I would leave class going, that just felt icky to me and I didn't necessarily benefit from that. So circling back to our conversation about learning about folks and engaging in this dialogue, I try to keep in mind that if I'm going to ask, Liz to share about her experience, what am I also willing to share with you about mine? So it's just not you. It's not just this one-way communication street, that I'm also willing to give something.
So do you think the secret to that is that you are offering a similar level of transparency so that it is that give and take mutual relationship instead of just sort of that sense of tokenism, you tell me about your fill in the blank and I sit here and I receive it and then I get to waltz away.
There you go.
Does it make it more of the real life human connection?
100%. And that's why I'm a big fan of, in the word intentionality.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it all has to do, I shouldn't say it all, but a big piece of the conversation is, the internal dialogue is, what is the intention of me even asking this question, right? Is it really seeking to understand and for me to get to know Liz better, or is it just waiting for that pregnant pause so I can one up and, so Liz can hear how great my Christmas is and, just have, because that really, then it's really about privilege, right? And keeping the systems at play that keeps all the icky stuff that we're really trying to break down at play. So if really the intention is to seek to understand, I really am coming to you from a place of trying to understand better, so we can have a better connection and a better relationship, so that we can break down these barriers that keep these systems of oppression at play. Then ask away. But even if I'm struggling to come up with an answer of like, what is the intent of me even asking Liz about her Christmas or her holiday celebrations, or what was holidays like in your life, and I get to the end of my processing and I really don't have a great answer, then I think that is my answer. Is maybe a better question is, or maybe no questions, I just maybe need to listen. My very first social justice retreat, and again, I'm going to bring up my colleague Dora. She invited me to my first social justice retreat, and at the time, I was just engaging my master's program, just getting done playing college football, and I really hadn't had an opportunity to name my experience and to put words to it. But I know that I had a lot of positive experience for living in Black skin, and some not so positive experiences. And when I was invited to a social justice retreat, which was, a couple days, a couple nights, that we were going to go up to Estes Park and talk about all things social justice and multiculturalism, my understanding is that, hey, this is the first time as a young adult that I was going to get on a bus with a room full of predominantly white people, and this is my first opportunity to get to tell them all the ways that they had treated me poorly. And there's facilitators there that were going to help them to listen and to understand. And what I learned quickly, and by quickly, within a couple hours of being at the retreat, is I was made aware of how much privilege that I had for the first, for all of the, I think it's 25 years of my life. I learned about my male privilege. I learned about my Christian privilege. I learned about the gift of growing up in a middle-class family in Colorado Springs. I learned about, the gift of being able-bodied and not having to even think about, curve cuts and, how I access a building. I learned about, my education privilege. I never once had to think about, where I was going to go to school and the type of education that I had access to. And I was humbled, to say the least. And I remember coming back down the mountain, and this particular social justice retreat ended it butted up against Martin Luther King Day, and I just remember coming back down that mountain, just in tears. And football players, we don't cry, right? But I just remember having like a just like a pulling my beanie over my eyes, just humbled, right? And it didn't invalidate my experience as a Black man, because there was time for me to share my truth related to being marginalized and oppressed too. So I didn't deny those experiences, but it changed my life.
You mentioned earlier that was sort of your advice. Just go find somebody and talk to them. Do you feel like that's universal across age groups?
Meaning engaging with folks, will that work for all age groups? Yeah, I do. My partner, she's a first grade teacher. And one of the things that and she's great, but one of the things that I remind her at the start of every year is, how much time do your students get to get in your classroom to know each other at the beginning of every year and throughout? Because there's so many sources of knowledge sitting right next to each other. And even as a college professor, I'm reminded weekly that, there's so much culture sitting in the classroom, even virtually now. And am I doing a good job of taking advantage of that? And so she'll have, check-ins from a cultural lens, and her first graders are, just asking questions like, hey, what do your tennis shoes mean to you? And, even some kids don't even, they don't have tennis shoes. And so that leads to a different conversation. So I think it blends well across age groups. This is my counseling office behind me, but students just come in and they say, what I desire most is deeper, more meaningful, and more intimate connections with the people that I do life with.
And I'm just grateful for your time and that encouragement to educators that it doesn't have to be fancy. You just have to be willing to engage in the conversation. So I appreciate you, Aaron, and thanks for taking the time so late in the evening.
Thanks for the opportunity to connect.